In this video today, I'll walk you through why Silicon Valley is considered the hub of technology, why it's such an important landmark for innovation, ideation, entrepreneurship. Why is it that we can see this consolidation effect with all of technology's growth coming out of what are hubs and in these centralized focal points? Now, the nexus for growth is a concept here whereby we'll define the required elements which go into technological advancement at such a high pace and rapidity that it's unforeseen in previous, say, eras and epochs. Now, when we think about something like Silicon Valley, we think very heavily on these tech nerds doing a lot of software, things like this, where they're trying to engineer certain products which will make our lives much better in so many ways. But obviously, as we are all Spenglerians here, we understand the notion of technology and technics is just a function of living, and that technology itself is a byproduct of existing phenomena. So to really lead off on this, I will just read a little bit from Spengler here out of Man and Technics, which is seminal work on technology. In reality, the passion of the inventor has nothing whatever to do with its consequences. It is his personal life motive, his personal joy and sorrow. He wants to enjoy his triumph over difficult problems and the wealth and fame that it brings him for their own sake. Whether his discovery is useful or menacing, creative or distributive, he cares not a jot. Nor indeed is anyone in a position to know this in advance. The effect of a technical achievement of mankind is never foreseen, and incidentally, mankind has never discovered anything whatever. Chemical discoveries like that of synthetic indigo and, what we shall presently witness, that of artificial rubber upset the living conditions of whole countries. The electrical transmission of power and the discovery of the possibilities of energy from water have depreciated the old coal areas of Europe and their populations. Have such considerations ever cared an inventor to suppress his discovery? And so this should give you an idea of the morality and the ethical standpoint of Silicon Valley. And this is how we have started to understand what are, I think, the nihilistic or technocratic versions of left and right-wing tech guys. This is to say you have many nouveau riche billionaires, arrivistes and parvenus who have come into money and thus some semblance of power from a position which before was occupied only by engineering problems or mathematical educations. So they've gone into what is a IT degree or a computer programming, computer science degree, and then come out of it with an idea, built a company, and 10, 15, 20 years later, they've been billionaires. This sudden impact of money into someone's life and then transformative elements to how they employ that money. You can see several extant examples here with someone like Jeff Bezos, and he went about buying the Washington Post. You can see Elon now with Trump. You can see Peter Thiel with his ventures, in particular J.D. Vance. You can see George Soros, how he came into money and then deployed it very politically, very quickly. But there are also other elements to this, like Rod Mercer from Rentec. So the idea is that you have an introduction to money before you have the introduction to the force of money in politics. It's just to say you're so used to certain outcomes from business and from finance and from technology and how that functions that you try to employ the same strategies to politics, and it doesn't work because there's a disconnect in the ethics of making money, particularly in a free market capitalist society like America versus maybe much more closeted crypto fascist country like China, for instance, where making money is seen as fine, but there's a clamp upon what you're allowed to do in China if you're a billionaire, versus in America where they let you run amok upon the system with disbursement of funds to whomever and whoever you can think of throwing them at. So this is why we see such a disruption effect from Silicon Valley, in particular, into politics. But in general, why Silicon Valley? Why is it that so many financiers come from New York, but then Silicon Valley has so many tech heads? Because you have this overlapping, and they call it technological and people principle here, where you have the infrastructure and the requisite focus and cynosure on technology mixed with the type of people, and this is typically geniuses, and so you get this valence, you get this coming together of these two critical elements in ways that have allowed for an explosion, basically this catalyzing effect, or how you would consider a substrate of innovation in that way. And we can think of it a little bit like a probability, or in here I've done a nexus where you can see combinatorially that there are elements to which start overlapping and interlaying more prevalently in a place like Silicon Valley, because it attracts people who are attracted to the technology, which attracts more people, which attracts more technology and advancements and enhancements and innovations, which then, as you see, positive feedback loop here around creating and compounding technological improvements. And so you get the Musks and the Gates and these Zuckerberg type figures who are the focal points of the drain for all these ideas into money and into a solidified, crystallized version of a man who's accountable to that. So this idea that Silicon Valley is special is both true and not true. It could be anywhere, but it is now Silicon Valley, so now it is special by per force, as we could say. Now, Spengler's idea of technology is perhaps the most true or philosophically true version. It's to say that technology is nothing specific and it's nothing impressive in the way that it's been the same exact mechanism by which we've just measured the functionality of life, of the techniques of living. Since man has picked up a rock or a stick to be a weapon, we've used technology to enhance things we were already doing. Now, the idea that technology is some sort of transcendent philosophical force is new, because tech guys in particular feel as if they're doing God's work in the way that finance guys thought they were doing God's work in the late 80s, 90s. So there's just a shift here from the I'm at the cutting edge forefront of something that's enabling such a paradigm shift in the entire world's focus that I deserve the ethical or moral credit around inventing and inventions. But as Spengler highlights, inventing and inventions is just the spitting in the face of God to a degree. It's this idea that there's a challenge that I can overcome, there's a problem that I can solve, and no whit is given to the regard of the problem from a moral perspective. It's just, can I win? How can I deploy my own attributes and nuance into such a degree, into such a specific niche issue that I can solve it and therefore invent something or synthesize something or whatever have you. Now, the idea, I say that the Faustian version of this is that technology, like software, is infinitely scalable to a degree, which is the most Faustian, you could say, technology to exist. It's that we've finally discovered even something more than financial markets, which is resembling and emblematic of Faustian need for this will to infinite. How do I make something that's deployable globally in the same day? I can have millions and billions of people using my platform tomorrow if they all found out about it and downloaded it from an application store. That's it. That's all that's required now, because of how prevalent ubiquitous software is and the mechanisms and the infrastructure that allow for it. And that's the marvelous part, I guess, about the Faustian considerations on technology, is that we need everyone at all points in time to be using and active and on these things. And this is the battle. This is the constant competitive edge that's trying to be forged here. It's that we know money is the outcome, but winning is the more important part about this. It's the, can I triumph? It's not, can I be the billionaire or what have you. That'll just be the secondary outcome from that. It is not to say that people don't love money, but the Faustian need to win is much more important than the Faustian need for pecuniary rewards. But this presents us with a problem. You've had a dissevering of the technology and entrepreneurs with the masses. So this is the kind of new function where you have this management class and a working class, and they now no longer know how to relate. There's such a vast difference in their prerogatives and in their experiences, and it doesn't come down to money at all now. It's much more around ideas and behaviors. The element to relatability, as I said, is dissevered in this way. And so technology becomes the defining trait. You're either literate or you're not, or you're into technology in a way that excludes others. And in doing so, you obfuscate many of the intricacies around lived life. You've made it difficult to just to be in the moment, to exist in that way. You now have to, if just as a bare minimum, interact with technology that's more advanced to the degree that we think of it as magic than you did 50 years ago. It just wasn't the case that you had to have anything digital 50 years ago. So you have octogenarians who now are in their dotard years encountering such strange alien technologies to themselves that they're incapable of actually functioning properly, and they just give up. And how do you connect yourself to someone like that? Well, you don't bother. Most of the Silicon Valley specialist technologists don't bother with any of this. They have much more high hopes pinned to something like transhumanism or bioethical engineering, something where there's a regard for them to be immortalized and not have to ever enter into this phase of, as I said, dotard, where you're incapable of actually understanding new things because it's all too complex and it's too much of a bother for you. Now, this separation of the two classes of people, the technologists and the Luddites, almost is what you would say, is that the cycle and the feedback loop gets more severe. There's a lot more potentiating out of somewhere like Silicon Valley and these other technology hubs, and you consider any almost a large metropolis to have a technology hub, which corresponds to somewhere back into Silicon Valley, where everything kind of seems to stem. It's this ethos theory around connectivity of networks. So ethos was a mathematician who made it his life's work to do as much mathematics as possible, and he spent as much time as possible with as many different mathematicians to actually conceptualize this entire holistic version of mathematics as it should be known. And so they have all these considerations around ethos that I won't go into, but you can think of it a little bit like this, how technology intermaps with each other. So you have this combinatorial factorial graph here, which at every point can now consider itself contactable on the edge to another vector. And in this vector space, we start to see the compounding effects of technology that if you're not in these, you're missing out. So you have to know, and you have to then be invited, and you have to then interact. And there's a deep, I think, symbolic effect of this, that you're in this inclusion, in this club. You have, say, TikTok, or you have some form of technology generating aspect or technology embracing aspect to you. Or, as I said before, you're a Luddite and everything is very strange and difficult for you. Now, maybe it's a little bit to do with IQ, but it's also about disposition, how much of your personality is entwined with new experiences and openness versus once you're fixed at a position, then you're stayed and immovable. The idea, I would say then, that we can think is that if you can now no longer sympathize or have a consideration for someone who's not like you, you can't understand why someone wouldn't want the internet, why someone wouldn't want a mobile smartphone in their pocket all the time, why now someone wouldn't want AI, is going to put you out of sorts when it comes to relating both socially but politically, importantly, with other people. So your Amish actually super added the distance between themselves technologically and modern society in that way. But this is Silicon Valley technology society. So because the gap is broadening at a much higher rate than, say, the time aspect of this, there's almost a exponential effect here where technology goes much higher than what some people are actually able to embrace, that you'll see a situation where you might have cyborgs, or your cortex will be implanted with a chip, and someone else may not even use glasses because they consider Benjamin Franklin to be a heretic. These are all kind of considerations. We can say that the transhumanism is some small step around advancing people, and that bifocals may have been the first invention for this, but they're certainly not even, or they're pale in comparison to where we'll get to in the next 50 years. This, I think, is probably the most polarizing and harsh reality we'll have to deal with, is the bifurcation of society into these, you're either on the technology team and incapable of addressing and dealing with what is a tech-obsessed society, or you're going to be a Luddite who is left in the dust in many ways. And this will impact your ability to earn a living. It'll impact your ability to sustain what is a 2 to 3 kid household with all the creature comforts that you may have been used to 60 years ago as a normal family that didn't necessarily have a bent towards technology. It is inhibiting everyone's ability to relate to each other in that really deep dyadic way. So I can maybe talk quickly about one risk here, is that this centralization effect does leave something to be desired from a risk perspective. The notion that you had Detroit, for instance, which was a car manufacturing focal hub, it was in its own way this nexus as I'm talking about, and for technology, but for particularly automotive technology, is that you rely much more heavily on the system reinforcing itself positively. Now, what happened to Detroit was obviously unionization completely ruined and hyper increased the costs to make cars. And when you start to see a downturn and also a dissolution of the concentration, you have the spreading out effect of technological innovation base, then you no longer have the elements required to super enforce these ideals around innovation. You need as many smart and considered people, and this is specialists and technical experts, much as you can into the same direct sphere with each other. Now, the internet has helped vastly around connecting people with these needs, but there is something still to be said around being proximity-wise, physically close to someone else that you may have to interact with to get an idea to a next level and to create and to generate and to improve things. You can see this historically with things like DARPA, with Bell Labs. You could say SpaceX nowadays is quite similar to this, that they have a concentration effect around aerospace engineering, maybe the old OpenAI around AI, currently no longer that good, but previously when they had most of the resources, someone like, as I said before, Rentech, Renaissance Technologies, which is a hedge fund which recruits really sophisticated PhDs in mathematics and physics, things like this, statistics, and then maybe NASA, back old NASA when it was actually a functional program that wanted to get to space. You can see how the concentration effect of these goes into technology building, and why in the Manhattan Project, and it's got shown here, that there's a huge requirement around having so many specialists in the same place working on the same problem. Even if much of it is wasted to some degree, you could have 98% of one of your employees not doing anything, but because you need them for that 2%, it is worth having them on the payroll, having them be there and comment and work together. And this also goes into what's required from a monetary perspective. You can have the infrastructure in Silicon Valley only because you have the concentration of the people who require the infrastructure. And if you think of the line of innovation as linear, then you can think of the pre-investment and the underappreciation of investment as an oscillation across that line, is to say you overinvest at some point and there's a trough where you've underinvested, and that you try to predict when the next requirement, and this can go into something like investing in data centers or computational AI centers where you have large requirements around chips. So computer chips, particularly with NVIDIA, that they have to build these large centers to be able to do mass computing. To do that, you need resources, and to do that, you have to then have specialists around how they generate those resources and things like that. So in general, it's a very important self-fulfilling prophecy that technology has in this way, that the megalopolis is the concentration of the masses from the countryside and from the rural areas into this one point. And because they are, and this is, I think Werner Sombart calls this the grains of sand effect, where everyone blows into what is a sand dune, but because they're not interconnected in any way, they're just random particles that they have nothing to relate to each other with, except that binds them now is their job or their fascination, their technology. But because it's money-based for many of the new ones, that they're only there until they own enough and then they'll leave, whereas the Faustian will stay forever because there's an inherent desire to be able to continue to see and solve these problems. You can see that with Elon Musk, for instance. He's got a very Faustian bent to him, his ethics aside, is that he wants to continually solve and promote difficult problems to the degree that it's innate in him to do this. It isn't something where money has solved his wants and wishes and he now no longer has the will for this stuff. He has this infinite pull, this destiny for it, and he has had to and still continues to fight in this way for these things, which may seem nonsensical to a lot of those materialists. Like, why would you bother when you have $200 billion? But it's not about the money. It stopped being about the money $199 billion ago, or more even probably. So that I think is hopefully a good summation as to why we think Silicon Valley is particularly both a high risk but the highest reward location in the world. It's because we've had the Faustian mindset condensed and concentrated into its most hardened and salient form here in what is a small town in the random West Coast state of California. And I think that will probably continue for at least a decade or two. Now, the supplanting of this will come about, and you can put money on it, that when the next war happens, there's an expediency around war, because in wartime there's an exigent force that is required by the state to say, now we need to develop this as fast as possible, as quickly as possible, with nominally unlimited resources for it to be solved. And so you'll have what is this culmination of existential, spiritual, and financial, and the triumvirate here around innovation is unsurpassable. You have the acme of Faustian technology being breeded in a wartime scenario with the smartest minds at hand and with the most amount of money possible. So the idea that you have any refraction period at all is minimized, because you're liaising consistently around the same problems with as many smart, bright people who have the same existential pull to this. And that's what we'll see. So I think maybe 2035, 2040, we'll start to see what is the next phase of technological advancement around, and this will be the downfall of Silicon Valley, you might say. So enjoy the next 10, 15 years, nerds, because that'll be the golden age, as you will call it by then.